As many of you know, our speaker today is Ari Roth. He's an American theatrical producer, playwright, director, and educator. He's also the artistic director of Mosaic Theater Company in DC down on H Street. Ari is the son of German-born refugees of the Holocaust. He was born and raised in Chicago on the South Side, as he pointed out, the same place as our rabbi. He graduated from the University of Chicago Laboratory High School, and then studied playwriting at the University of Michigan, a proud Wolverine. Right. Based on his playwriting, he received 2 Avery Hopwood Awards for drama, the first in 1981, which was given by Arthur Miller, also a U of M alumni. From 1997 to 2014, Ari served as the artistic director of Theater J, which many of us went to on a regular basis. Over 18 seasons, he produced more than 129 productions and created festivals, including locally grown community-supported art, Voices from a Changing Middle East, and Theater J's acclaimed Beyond the Stage and Artistic Directors Roundtable series. In 2010, he was named as one of the Forward 50, honoring nationally prominent men and women who are leading the American Jewish community into the 21st century. In December of 2014, he was dismissed as the artistic director of Theater J, and hundreds of noted figures in the world of American theater contested his termination. Tony Kushner called it an act of political censorship, and I think many of us did. Specifically, it was said that he was fired due to his protesting the DC JCC's cancellation of Theater J's Voices from a Changing Middle East, a series that I personally thought was just wonderful. The DC JCC denies that his termination was political. However, immediately following his departure from Theater J, he founded Mosaic Theater Company, where he presently is at. From 1988 to 1997, he also was a lecturer for the University of Michigan's English, which I'm having difficulty with today apparently, and theater departments, teaching playwriting and dramatic literature. He later taught in the Department of Theater Arts and the Genesis Institute at Brandeis University, and was an adjunct professor at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. He's been a visiting professor, yeah, I'm having difficulty today with English, at the Carnegie Mellon University School of Drama. And also a professor in their dramatic writing program, a visiting writer at George Washington University. Since 2006, I'll get finished, all right. You have a long resume. This is about half of what I could say about him.
It's not his fault.
Since 2006, he's taught a course in political theater in Washington, D.C. for University of Michigan's Michigan and Washington program, the University of San Francisco's USF in D.C. program, and the University of California, Berkeley's Berkeley, Washington program. That's it for today. So I'm very pleased to introduce Ari Roth.
Here's your phone, Robert.
Oh.
Can you hear me okay? All right. Hello. I'll begin formally in a second. I'll just say informally how wonderful it is to be back here at Temple Micah. I've always loved it here. Beginning with the fact that Rabbi Zemel and my father were good friends on the south side of Chicago, that we have a dear friendship in the artist Liz Lerman in common, that I've been here for moving funerals, I've been here for dramatic play readings, both for Theater J and later with Mosaic Theater Company, plays on gun violence that the Temple has partnered with your church, Riverside Church, to have important conversations about issues that touch us all in this community. What's it, Michelle?
Either now closer to you or speak louder, everybody.
I'm going to try my best to make sure everybody can hear me every moment. So welcome. One of Mosaic's subscribers has asked that I take a show of hands to ask you, how many people have been to Mosaic Theater at the Atlas Performing Arts Center? Beautiful, thank you. And how many of you have been or are you now a subscriber to Mosaic? Great. We will hawk you a little later. We have board members here, we have good friends here. I want to recognize Muriel Wolf and Ed Grossman, who are long-serving board members with us, and thank them. I have a talk today that promises to be intense, maybe moving. It will be for me, for sure. And I hope to take a number of questions, but I've got more material than I need. So I'll cut myself in the middle here, unless you really want me to keep going. This sound, is it a little echoey?
Yes.
It's not perfect. You know, I'll try to modulate, but good. So the talk today is on resilient relationships, the dramas of creating cutting-edge theater. I wanted to talk about resilient relationships because I've been writing about them, I've been living through them, I feel they're important. Retrieving challenged relationships and making them right again. Relationships that were bent, if not broken, but have demonstrated an ability to spring back. That process of suffering and then recovery. I wanted to investigate with you those properties of resilience, which is a pretty ubiquitous word these days. And these days when we hear about resistance, fighting back, our resilience is often called into being. But even though it may be hackneyed and cliched, for me, it resonates. And coming from a family of shrinks, I've been around the word since I hit puberty. The other part of the talk is about creating cutting-edge theater, which by nature of the art form involves collaboration, which is itself a politically charged word these days in these very radicalized times. Collaborating involves concession, compromise, a sense of collective participation in this age of the selfie, in an age of artificial reality play, where young people put on goggles and headphones to have no human distraction or interaction whatsoever. It's us versus the machine. These days, collaborating with the enemy can get you killed. If you're an army deserter, or a Palestinian, or a member of the Republican Party, and your name is Mitt Romney. Yet here we are in a congregation, part of a Jewish community. Some of us know each other from the Jewish Community Center. If we believe in the word community, then we have to, de facto, believe in collaboration and all those properties, including compromise. Now, I don't commune much with the JCC anymore. I've been to the new space. The woman who dismissed me, who I made up with a year ago at Bread and Chocolate on Connecticut Avenue, and then on stage at Mosaic Theater 14 months ago, is now leaving the community center herself. A bit prematurely. I wish her well, and I really did like half of the article in the Washington Jewish Week about her, appreciating less the quote they reattributed to her, which was uttered in the heat of battle 5 years ago, I'm sure. I think history will prove a different epitaph for both of us than what that article insinuated. In the end, it was just a bad paragraph in a tribute piece, and I'm sure Carol and I will connect again. But I want to interrogate these properties of the resilient relationship. And Carol Zawadzki and I have had such. I want to inquire into its well-being. Do we really still believe that such reconciliations are possible between the different conflicts we've just referred to? Let's look at a definition of resilience. The capacity to recover quickly from difficulty. The ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, demonstrating elasticity. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity or trauma, tragedy or threats, such as family or relationship problems, health problems, workplace or financial stress. It means bouncing back. Resilience is a little different than persistence. Persistence is about continuing firmly or obstinately in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition, continuing to exist or endure over a prolonged period of time unchanged. In botany, in zoology, they refer to a thing that is attached that won't fall off even after its function has ceased to be. If you look on the internet, there's a whole science of resilience. The implications for prevention and treatment of depression. The science of resilience involving recovery and sustainability. So it applies to the environment as well. Examples of resilience in the non-scientific or dramatic realm is what I want to talk about. My migration from Theater J to Mosaic may be seen as a case study in resilience. But really, what was involved? Let's look at one example of what resilience feels like. This past Monday night, some of you were with me for a reading of a play by Moti Lerner, a name you'll recognize from the controversy of 2014 when Theater J produced a workshop production of Moti Lerner's The Admission. All hell broke loose, lots of coverage, not a ticket to be had because the performances were sold out for 16 straight times. It moved to studio theater for 22 more performances. But in the end, the persistence of that production, not to be deterred, was its own form of insubordination, and ultimately a good reason why the parent agency of Theater J wanted to close down the festival. We had a reading on Monday night of Moti's latest play, a monodrama called I Was There. I'll just read a tiny bit about the plot of it. A daring theatrical attempt to deal with the complex situation involving an IDF soldier who wants to preserve his humanity in the face of an unspeakable act. The country's political and military leadership prefers to bury its head in the sand. He's compelled to testify. No one wants to hear. We presented a 55-minute play in front of 75 people. After the 55-minute reading, which was scintillating but challenging, we had a 55-minute discussion, which was open and full of mixed opinion. It involved Palestinians, Israelis, and Americans on stage and in the audience. It was open, it was moving. For the Palestinian woman on stage, she said, I feel empathy as I have never felt in this kind of mixed setting. The truth is a great comfort. So in the midst of a relentless evening of depressing testimony, for some, hope emerged. It was a beautiful night and a small, wonderful moment for Mosaic in the midst of many small and big, wonderful moments. That this work persists, that freedom of expression endures, that the conflict barrels forward, and that resistance is made up of people engaging, speaking truth, and attempting to create change like you're trying to do in your voting today to the World Zionist Congress. Our mission with the Voices from a Changing Middle East Festival has not attempted to be relentless. We have understood that resilience requires its own expansiveness and elasticity. And so our engagement with Israel and Israel's neighbors is about a multiplicity of engagements and of subject matter within the realm of the region. Not only have we dealt with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we've dealt with the immigration crisis. We've dealt with asylum seekers from East Africa. We've dealt with Filipino foreign workers taking care of Alzheimer's patients who do a drag act in a karaoke bar. We've dealt with Egyptian immigrants to the United States, and Somali refugees, and Saudi pilgrims returning to make the Hajj, and how an American Jew and an Egyptian Muslim might fall in love and create a new life together. And the brand new play that we're doing at Mosaic now, the new production, I should say, Pilgrims Musa and Sherry in the New World, which runs through this Sunday with a matinee performance tomorrow at 11 a.m. A wonderful play. So that is the anchor production for this 20th anniversary of the Voices from a Changing Middle East Festival. Instead of relentless, the resilient mission follows a more peripatetic journey. And that was another word I wanted to look up because I learned something. Traveling from place to place, in particular working or based in various places for short periods of time, might define our thematic engagements with and around the Israeli project. But there's another definition of peripatetic that, and some of you probably know this, I didn't, that refers to the Aristotelian Socratic method. Aristotle's practice was to walk to and fro with a band of students teaching science, the practical, the productive, and the theoretical aspects of science. They would walk hither and yon, have their philosophical discussions, and return home. I never knew that peripatetic meant that, but I think that's a good way to look at having journeys of surprise and undetermined direction, but always knowing your through line, knowing the intellectual intention, and knowing where it is to return home. Transforming difficulty and finding new light. Truth comes from clarity. And yet all I've been speaking about right now is resilience with respect to a mission or a collective calling, which is really a step removed from what is really the coin of the realm in the theater, which is the personal, the emotional. And that's what I thought I'd like to share with you today. Some case examples, not of collective resilience, but of resilience within an individual relationship. So let me talk about a few. and share some dramatic examples. Resilient relationships that have at the center a powerful power dynamic between mother and son, between collaborators, between co-workers. We're going to look at all three of those. As a young writer, in my early 20s, I wrote about my parents as Holocaust survivors, refugees, and our role as children of refugees. What our legacy was, what our voice was. How could we find our own light amidst all these shadows, giant shadows? And I told you, I've grown up with the word resilience all my life. So here is a little scene from a play I wrote when I was in my mid-20s, but I couldn't get produced till I was 50 years old. It took that long to bring Andy and the Shadows to the stage. Mother, named Raya. I could use some help on my own paper. Do you realize I've been writing a first paragraph on this paper for 8 years? Andy says, Mom, I need your attention because I have had a tendency to embellish your history. Raya says, Origins of Resilience, Prevailing in the Face of Stress. That's the title, and I hate it a lot. I mean, it's clinical, it's clumsy, it's clunky. It's fine, Ma. Oh, I have good ideas, I know that. And then I'll skip ahead, where Raya describes her work. I have mothers and infants from the ghetto, impoverished, drug abused, who each have such a debilitating impact upon the other that by the end of the day, after I've dropped all the rhetoric, I throw up my hands and I say, why bother? Prevailing in the face of stress? Who prevails in the face of stress? Do you think I have? Do you think these people ever will? Well, Mom, you get kids to stop eating paint, and do you think they forget what it tastes like? They are from the ghetto. They are of the ghetto. They will be followed by a ghetto, no matter where the hell they wind up. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? Andrew, you do not know from harsh. You will never know of mockery. You will hear of it, but yours is not to know. You are an American, you are not lost, you are not a stranger, you aren't wounded, and yet this rage, don't think I don't hear it, don't think I don't hear every ounce of rage in that probing little voice. And that rage, Andrew, is not even yours, it is mine. I gave birth to it. I held you from it, and I showed you. A world full of promise and hope. And your answer to me is a scream that is not even yours. It is my shriek and my rage, and you will not be affected by such pains anymore. Mom, you keep trying to protect me. I am freeing you. No, I am right, and you have no right. You have no right to hurt over things that are finished. Well, then why'd you start? Why'd you bother telling your stories in the first place? So they wouldn't die when you die. Raya says, go ahead, let them. Andy says, I can't have a bunch of dead stories in my head, Mother. They're alive. They are alive, and I'm not going to let you kill them. Those stories were shared. They may have happened to you, but they were given to me. They were colored in by me. They are being claimed by me, roots, thorns, and all, because nothing is dying. That is my scream. Thank you. That was a little scene from my play, Andy in the Shadows. The reason it's moving to me, you'll find out in the next scene. Another play I'm writing right now is a response to a different kind of trauma, and that is a creative trauma. I was involved a year ago after a nice success, after a nice comedy from Israel called Oh God by Anat Gov. Very funny play about God going to visit a psychiatrist, right? Because he's depressed. We then follow that up with a play called Shame. And I'm going to share with you now a little email I received yesterday from my director, John Vreeke, who directed many plays at Theater J and at Mosaic. And he's been reading these drafts that I've been writing about the experience of working on this Israeli-Palestinian-American collaboration that didn't go so well. In the end, I was the one who really got it, not from the right wing, but from the left. That's the story I'm trying to tell about resilient relationships after traumatic collaboration in a play called My Brief Affair with Miri Regev. Miri Regev, you'll learn in the play, and some of you may know, is the current Minister of Culture and Sport for the State of Israel, a major partner and ally to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and responsible for a cultural mission that involves a lot of censorship. So this is what John wrote to me. The central focus of the storytelling and motivation to do Shame was about the Israeli Cultural Ministry's censorship of anything pro-Palestinian, and by extension, of anything that supports the Palestinian right to exist equally and freely. We wanted to extend and illuminate that story by way of dialogue, adding the character of Miri Regev, and by revealing what happened to the Israeli actress and writer Einat Weizman and her collaborator and scene partner Morad Hassan, since they initially performed Shame as a documentary theater piece in Israel. Shame 2.0, which we were going to do in America, was ultimately rejected in the rehearsal room by the artists because they felt that you, or Ari, was propagating in an Israeli idea that dialogue is necessary to resolve differences. Their stand is that dialogue only prolongs criminal behavior and in a sense justifies it, normalizes it. So they felt their method of theatrical storytelling needed to reflect that. No dialogue, not even a shared space on stage, and certainly no dialogue with the Minister of Culture and Sport. That's where it all went wrong. Now he's reflecting on what I've written, the version I shared with him, and he says, I find that the issue of your Zionist DNA fighting with your liberal Jewish artistic director, writer, artist need to create dialogue synthesis creates a situation where you're fighting with both the extreme right and left. And that's very intriguing. Lots of liberal Jews living in this country who can't reconcile how Palestinians are treated, yet have a love for the idea of a Jewish state. How to reconcile? That's a great story to tell. That's the drama. As concerns you, and as concerns the bigger world of Israel. That is why you insist on the need for dialogue. And it's not as simple a blanket as who's right, who's wrong. The disappointment of not being able to fill the hope and promise of Shame 2.0 should be told. But maybe it's getting too much focus. Is that the story? Or is that the vehicle in order to tell another story? So that's the artistic dialogue going on right now. And what I'm going to do is share with you some excerpts from that brand new play. I'm going to try not to adopt dialects. I'm going to try not to sound Israeli for a moment. I'm definitely going to try not to sound Palestinian for a moment. I'll sound like myself. I'm going to pick it up from page 14, right in the middle. This is for a Palestinian actor. My name is Mahmoud Hassan, and this is my story, as we have performed it first in 2015, and in that period time has passed, and events have happened that add to this shame, which is now called 2.0, but still documentary theater about our struggle to use art as a tool for resistance. I don't know how I feel about following this Miri Regev on our stage. No, I do. I don't like it, and I wouldn't do it. Except that she is not the real Miri Regev. She is the intelligent American actress, Lynette, which is different from the real Miri Regev, who some people see as intelligent, a clever actress, but I don't. I see her as dangerous, which is why I'm in Washington now, because she may be coming here someday. To which Miri says, "It's true, they don't call me BB in heels for nothing." Mahmoud continues, "We perform our shame in separate sections because our stories are separate. There is a Nazi experience as a Jewish Israeli, and there is mine as a Palestinian Muslim with Israeli citizenship, as opposed to Arab Israeli. I live in Israel. I am separate from this identity. And my role in this play is not to be part of a coexistence conversation. We are separate. And this is the structure of the original 1.0. At your Mosaic, you want dialogue. You believe in dialogue. Okay, we will give you a little dialogue, but no shared narrative, no relationship drama except what you infer. Our situation under occupation should not be normalized by relationship talk. So those of you looking for scene work, you will be disappointed. And we will describe one such. We may even do one, as you have just heard before, but we do not like these kind of plays. We don't believe in these kind of plays, and yet we do them because we like to eat and pay rent. But we despise ourselves just a little too, and yet we are proud. So we have our contradictions. This is an inevitable theme. The artistic director addresses the audience, says, Mahmoud never said any of this. He liked the speech for a while, thought it built anticipation in December when I read it to him in Tel Aviv, in my hotel. By January, he was refusing all improvised scenes we had created over the summer, anything I had written, rejecting Miri in the audience, on stage. Only on screen would she be allowed in a brief clip. On the third day of rehearsal, January 9th, 2019, and the days will matter here, he had an idea to reorganize the opening and cut the play in half. On day 4, my birthday, which won't matter, except that it was a disaster, the worst, except again, in the scheme of things, it matters not. Murad announced, I'm using the name Murad and Mahmoud interchangeably here. He announced that he was taking over as writer and would be coordinating every step with Einat on WhatsApp. We thought about canceling. The director, John, and I looked at each other. walked down to my office. We sat and read the first half of a different play about Israelis and Palestinians and wondered if we could just swap 2/3 of the shame cast into this other 4-character play. But where would the Palestinian actor come from? And would it be too publicly messy for subscribers, disruptive? There was an executive committee going on in the conference room. I showed my face and it was ashen. They were fine with whatever we would decide, they told us. We went back into the rehearsal room for 45 minutes. 45 minutes later and had a heart-to-heart with the cast. Einat texted me in the morning. "You threatened to cancel the play?" I said, "No." Einat says, "That's what Mahmoud texted." Well, his behavior is totally unprofessional. We had to get through to him somehow. No one there has ever experienced this kind of behavior. Einat says, "This happens all the time in my country." Well, here it's considered unsafe. We have a stage manager in distress. She says, "The tension in the room is unbearable." Einat says, "Well, that's the director's fault." I say, "No, it's not." She says, "I'm going to write him and tell him to get the situation under control." And she did. Mahmoud comes back and says, "If I may, it's going to get messy in a moment, if it isn't already, as far as Mahmoud is concerned. And I'm sure he's going to be projected in either a harsh light or a dim light, an unprofessional light, as if he were the villain. But I'd like to offer a response to this monologue about dialogue, because I think that's the debate at the center of this exercise. Not his bad behavior, because he's just an actor in the end fighting for his character, just like me. Do you believe in dialogue between people of difference? Does this documentary play, which is essentially monologue-driven, need to have fictitious back-and-forth dialogue every so often to make it legitimate and worthy for the stage? I think that's the argument, am I right? Intermittent dialogue or none? I say, I believe in intermittent dialogue. He says, well, I don't. So maybe it needs to be more than intermittent. Drama is driven by dialogue. Mahmoud says, we're not talking about drama for drama's sake or art for art's sake. We're talking about politics. We're talking about the use of dialogue as a tactic for preservation of the status quo. Having dialogue where nothing happens and no change occurs, leaving structures of occupation exactly in place. This is the definition of a fig leaf. And ideally, we would continue a debate about the efficacy of dialogue and whether it changes anything. Do conversations change people? Because I believe they do or can. And I try for days to craft the perfect backstage dialogue for Einat and Mahmoud to make it exactly what they might have said to each other at the Al Midan Theater in Haifa. Einat texts back, it's ridiculous. You threaten to send him home on a plane if he doesn't shut up and say words he doesn't believe he should say? I say, he believed a lot of those words a month ago. So did you when we met. She says, you heard what you wanted to hear. It was never official. We don't have an approved script. My contract says I get to approve. I say, your contract was a mistake. We did it in a hurry, okay? There was a deadline for a grant. We've been trying to get you to sign a new one all fall. She says, this is not my problem. That you and your team sent a contract which I signed so that you can submit for a grant. I say, I don't even remember reading it, okay? And she says, well, I do, very carefully, and my husband's a lawyer. And we wouldn't sign any version or new writer, and we won't. So we're keeping the agreement, which you said, which is standard. This is my story, my words, and the same for Mahmoud. I write for him in his name, and he trusts me. I say, he trusted me too. She says, never fully. I say, when I read it to him at that hotel, and then I read it to you, I left with 7 points for revision. She says, I never trusted you to do them. You invited me in, you gave me access. Einat says, we were being polite. I say, you let me tell a fuller story, not just 3 months in your career, but 3 years, when your dramas will become a much bigger story about censorship at every turn. Einat says, now who's censoring? By threatening to cancel. I say, An actor just can't get up in the middle of rehearsals and say he's taking over as writer. Einat says, let him say what he wants, don't listen. I never do what he says, but maybe learn something different in the process. I say, I've been incorporating feedback, his and yours, for the past 4 months. She says, so how come nothing changes? I say, I'm on draft 83. She says, tiny changes, but the basic concept remains, about a crazy woman, Miri Regev, on stage in dialogue with us. In our play, I say, it's our play. Einat says, we will not have dialogue with each other or this woman or anyone else on stage. This we boycott. It's going on, I know, I'll cut a little bit of this, but what the hell. Einat, you make exceptions all the time. You live with contradiction in just about every part of your life. The fierceness of your politics, the comforts of Tel Aviv, your children's school, the health care you enjoy, your career in television. Aren't these in constant conversation, this privilege and responsibility? That's what makes you interesting. That's why John and I flew to Tel Aviv to begin with, so we could show the complexity, so we could put that on stage and debate. We hired an actress to play the role of Miri Regev 6 months ago, based on your initial approval. The fight goes on. We terminate. She ends by saying, you cannot send Mahmoud home to his family and tell them that he's come back from America with nothing. Can you imagine the shame? Can you imagine the shame you are imposing on that family that you have met? Einat and I didn't text again. Communication happened through other staff as Einat and Mahmoud began drafting. Meanwhile, it was quiet, open warfare in the rehearsal room. I was asked not to return by the actor. The stage manager had to let me know the writer was not welcome. Nor was the artistic director, and we were the same. And then came the work stoppages, demands for money to execute new revisions that the adapter couldn't finish. And in the name of the show must go on, we rehearsed. On January 16th, there was a meeting brokered between me, Mahmoud, and my associate artistic director at a restaurant across the street from the theater, a nice Turkish place. We set up the scene for the restaurant. Mahmoud refused to sit. For 15 minutes, he stood, he paced, as my associate artistic director finally prevailed on him to come to the table. And when he did, she asked us both what we might want to say to each other. Now that we're here, how might you like to see this resolved? I began with an apology, a qualified apology, which, as qualified apologies have a tendency to do, triggered an immediate, as he says, you are the worst of the Zionist colonialist occupiers with your lies. You say you will make changes, you don't. One word, you make the slightest adjustment and give nothing away. You relinquish not 1 inch. And when we say this in rehearsal, you don't listen. And when we say this again and present alternatives, you threaten to send us home. You have a heart-to-heart with the company and tell us to behave or you'll cancel. I say, I didn't mean that as a threat. He says, of course it was a threat, you idiot. We do your idea or you lock us out of the theater? We don't want your idea. We don't like your idea, and neither do your people. Your staff thinks you are a colonialist occupier yourself. Mahmoud, don't divide the staff from leadership and leadership from each other. You divide with your bullshit colonialist mission. You know you are ignoring who I am when you call me this. You're ignoring your history. The reason why this theater was founded, what we fought for to get here, is all based on a mission of shared narrative and debate. So when you accuse that very mission of being bullshit, he says, everybody knows it, the whole city, all your multicultural programming is bullshit. I say, stop it, please. He says, no, I won't. I say, this project, our play, our shared enterprise is to create a play opposing censorship. Am I right? Can't we all agree on that? I don't agree with anything you say. Goes on. His parting words: "You legitimize racists. You give voice to racists. You are run by white supremacist racists, and the people you work for don't want it. Am I right?" I'm going to skip ahead. He ends by texting after he's already left, "I will put on a great performance. You will see." A day later, after reading new texts that Mahmoud had stayed up writing, we sat in a circle, the senior staff and I. And I said, "Well, we have a script that no longer works. We have an equity actress playing Miri from whom they've stripped all lines. Denying voice and dialectic is antithetical to our mission. We're a fusion community. We create fusions of sensibility." Mahmoud texts to us, "That philosophy is bankrupt. Everyone knows it. Relinquish power. This is a mutt." And the text kept coming. Rehearsals continued. In different restaurants, Mahmoud dictated new ideas to the dramaturg. He shared material with Einat in Israel, which she rejected, saying she would get to shame next week when her schedule allowed, but admitting that Mahmoud's wouldn't work. He wasn't a writer. Meanwhile, John, the director, worked on part one with Colleen, the original, which Mahmoud knew and loved because he had traveled with it. I continued work on an emergency draft in one act, not two. Could have worked, but nobody saw it. We were running another Israeli play on the main stage as part of our festival, Anat Gov's "Oh God," which Shane refers to, the most famous Israeli comedy, and how it's been used over the years to whitewash the occupation when brought into settlement amphitheaters deep in the West Bank. People see it and laugh at its critique of a patriarchal deity, unaware that the late Anat Gov's left-wing politics, sly indicting of the very act it's enabling. We thought it was nifty programming at Mosaic to have these two plays speak to each other with lots of post-show discussion. On Saturday, January 19th, preparing for a call from home with Benita of the Roy Cochrane Foundation about funding our show, The Till Trilogy, our theater was still 8 weeks away from getting official word about what would become the largest grant in our theater's history, because that's what they do, the Cochrane Foundation. They underwrite dream production as opposed to nightmare workshops, which this is turning out to be. I get a call on the other line, call waiting from Chicago. It's the backup Polish caretaker, Maria. She tells me that my father isn't responding. After 2 waking hours earlier, getting dressed for breakfast, while my mother was sleeping, my father waiting with his shoes on in bed, his eyes closed, isn't waking, isn't breathing. So I tell her to call 911. She already has. An emergency team is on their way. They come up, they're in the room, they do chest compressions. He's still not waking. I talk to my mother about what's going on in the bedroom as it fills with people. They're trying to revive him, Mom. They're using a defibrillator. She's not really understanding. An automatic external defibrillator, the EMT tells me, and I tell my mom, who are all these people? What's happening? I stay on the phone for 80 minutes. The head EMT explains they can't get a reading. They can't get a pulse. They can't get a heartbeat. They perform electroshock cardio, or whatever it's called, 7 times. No response. And after another 5 minutes, they say they're going to call it. He explains the protocol about calling the hospital, but not an ambulance when a patient is over a certain age. We wait another 5 minutes, and then we agree. I'm on the phone with my mother as my father dies. Walter and Chaya, whose bond was the Holocaust in Israel. Refugees who made the pilgrimage. My mother from 1945 to 47, just after the war, went to Palestine on youth aliyah. And my father, from 1955 to 56, after law school, he went to Kibbutz Ma'aleh Hamisha, overlooking the road to Jerusalem. The famous Burma Road that Kirk Douglas fought for in the movie Cast a Giant Shadow that I wrote about, making fun of all the kitsch. A young writer wanting Dad to be an American Jewish hero who saved a brand new Israel as it was coming into being. Instead, they were Jewish German immigrants in America, forever scarred, forever redeemed by the promise of Zionism. Labor Zionism, progressive Zionism, pioneering Zionism. It was never a dirty word in our house. We were always moving to Israel the next year. That's why we always rented for the first 15 years of my life, because my mother never wanted to plant roots in America. We belonged elsewhere. But the language was a problem for Dad. Law was his anchor. Justice was his anchor. And we were anchored to Chicago, to the South Side. So we never moved, never to the North Side, never to the suburbs, never to Israel, only longed for and felt connected to, and spoke of loving the land, criticizing as we became more aware, but always from a place of love. Why is this ringing? Israel, always from a place of love. It was a relative, this country, and we were there all the time, in grade school, in high school, in college for a year. I met my wife there. We taught there. Israel was woven into every strand of our upbringing. The Jewish day school we attended, the bookshelves that lined the entire house were either Holocaust psychology, Jewish history, Israel, or Saul Bellow. I would be flying home to Chicago to bury my dad, sit shiva for the week, while my adaptation, shaved, honed, amputated, would be buried as well. A not script, if and when she could get to it, would be the one we'd decide on, whether to accept it or not. Those were the terms that our board president was advising us to take, that we adjudicate based on our values, and that I make the call, God bless him. If we could live with the script, we'd do the show. If we couldn't, we'd cancel. A not script would arrive the morning after the funeral. I'll stop there. Thank you. So I'm sharing a work in progress with you. I've just finished the second act of it, so there's more, and there's meetings between people who were in artistic combat. We get through the show. I travel back to Israel. I meet Einat. I meet Morad or Mahmoud. I ask for an interview with Miri Regev. I drive to Rehovot. I meet Miri Regev alone in her kitchen. We have a long scene. All of that is fictitious. I've made it up, what I've just shared with you. The Miri Regev affair is an affair of the mind. The reconciliations with Einat and Morad are a different kind of reality. And that's my story. You've been on a journey with me today. And thank you for listening. So I'll take any questions you have.
You left this crowd speechless, which is the first.
It's a good crowd.
Any questions for Ari?
Ari.
Wait.
Hi. I'm wondering whether it's impossible to do theater in politics based on what you've said here, although I've always believed that dialogue and leads to various political solutions sometimes, but maybe not.
I won't presume to answer on one foot right now. I'd be really interested to collect a few different impressions and questions. It's a perfect question. I'm asking the same thing. So let's see about the answer. Harriet, you had something? We've got a microphone right here. Harriet.
So the psychological word shame is about the worst abuse that anyone can give another person. When you shame somebody, that is almost hitting below the belt. And people do not recover from a shameful act and very often go off into other dimensions. How broad did you mean the word shame in this? Because it's very relevant to the dialogue and how you reconcile with other people.
Well, it's such an interesting question. Of course, one of the components of the original play, Shame, is that there is very caustic responses from the internet, from the Twitter sphere, from commentaries that are a kind of shame that we all recognize, what we call it trolling. You read the comments section in the Washington Post. You know, it's an ugliness compounded upon ugliness. And we're living in a very shameful age. And yet, probably we've all developed thicker skin as a result. There is more shame slung at us, and we are living with more shame that includes everything that the Me Too movement is about, all the harassment, all the sexting, all of the ways in which a person can be vilified and exposed and dishonored, are all women and men in the same way are recipients of an onslaught of shame as never before. And how are we responding to all of this?
And resilience comes back to that.
I mean,
To
but
do
how-
first
how-
circle.
Right. I mean, it is the fact that I could have an emotional response with you today, and that since in the year and a month since my father died, I have not cried very much because I just haven't gone there. I haven't allowed myself to, and I have my own coping mechanisms. I think I cried 100 times today, just reading this material.
Yeah.
So it just tells you how covered up we are in order to push away this offending material.
Right.
And then what is it that opens this up? It's our humanity. We are very vulnerable, and we have to cover up that vulnerability in this age we live in. And when we can let it out, and that's why the theater is a beautiful place, because it's a place for catharsis.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Ari.
Other questions?
I have not formulated this as a question well, so but Monty Lerner, I mean, this is also what he deals with, really deals with. And the first production I ever saw of his was Mishpat Kastner. You know it? And
That's the Kastner trial.
yes, the
Yep.
Kastner trial, which is very relevant still. Is there any way, I mean, like bringing it back, doing it, the content is different, my God, it's so relevant,
It's the politics of collaboration and Jews in World War II, how the horrible challenge to save other Jews through compromises you make with the Nazis. Yep.
And Costner's, excuse me, hear me. It's in the news today in Israel because there are historians pushing to get the records open, how much Israel might have had government Mosaic might have had in his death. It's, anyway,
The short answer to the producing that play,
Yeah.
because it has over a dozen actors, it's never successfully been produced in the United States. It's considered too expensive. There is a major revival of it being planned for the Camry Theater in Israel. So they're in a revised version. So the play is very much part of the, you're absolutely right, it's part of the Israeli conversation.
Here we are.
So you introduced this conversation by saying that shame was a failure at the theater. And I saw it. I did not think it was a failure.
Good for you. That's
But I'm fascinated that for you it was, and I don't think that you've explained why.
Sure, well, I'll get to that. I mean, I think, first of all, it wasn't a shameful presentation on our stage, and that is a tribute to all the professionals who worked to make it a work of integrity and to preserve what it was. It received respectful reviews. It had its languors, but you've heard some languors in the play today, you know, in the excerpt I've read for you today. So I think the explaining of both what was seen by the public, what was accepted, and even Al Jazeera Television did a half-hour profile, and the first 3 minutes of that profile are begin this play. So I think there will be an attempt to be objective about what was presented. Thank you.
First, may your father's memory be a blessing. You talk about dialogue, and I'm sure that the real Miri Regev would never be on that stage. And in my experience, I'm not so sure that the words you might put into her mouth would be the words that she would use. And let me get your comment on the idea that I speak to many, many people who are conservative. They find that when they are in situations like this, they have to be quiet. They can't say anything. I know people who say, I can't talk to my friends, I can't talk to my family, and I know you talked about dialogue. But I'm getting the impression, in fact, there was an article in the Jerusalem Post, how rabbinical students who are conservatives at the Reform and conservative rabbinical schools are afraid to say that, are afraid to come out that they are conservative. And I appreciate your emotion. Believe me, I have same emotions going the other way. So can I get a comment on that?
Well, I think the attempt was to write a powerful conservative critique of this left and radical left and center left positioning. I have a 2-page letter from a Mosaic subscriber, a former Theater J subscriber, who shares his frustration and admits to being an Ari Roth supporter and never wanting Ari Roth to commit artistic suicide by giving voice to the right, because the artistic community would kill him if there is ever a play that promoted the right-wing critique of Palestinian behavior, the right-wing critique of an Israeli self-hating left wing, and then goes on to talk about all the ideas for plays that should be done. So I hear and am aware and feel that the theater should platform that debate. I don't think the right-wing voice should be censored. And that is the live critique of the left, that the left is censorious, as censorious as the right wing is. Theater should be the place where all bets are off. So I appreciate what you're asking. Muriel.
You've talked.
Thank you.
You've talked about a lot of things related to Jewish things, Palestine and Israel. There are some plays which you've done which are not related to that. And I think of the one where there was...
Three-quarters of them are not. We do a lot of stuff.
Certainly some of the issues related to the black... I remember the black... I forget the name of the play now, but the students who were being discriminated against who were African American. And you've done a lot of diversity as well.
Sure. I mean, obviously, Mosaic is not a Jewish theater. It's not devoted. The Voices from a Changing Middle East Festival is a small quadrant, a corner of what we do. But the through line, the commonalities of both social justice and a look to give voice to underrepresented voices is a commonality within the mission. And the debate, you have all heard in certain circles the word intersectionality, which really applies to an idea that suffering and oppression and racism need not be relegated to one sphere or one region, and that you can see certain dynamics. The dynamic of white privilege, the dynamic of what you would call, what is called white supremacy, that is alive in North America, maybe just as alive in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so if you can begin to see through a social justice lens that dynamics, that systems of oppression, as they're called, happen in one place, they can happen in another. That's not to say that the race struggle in America is identical to what's happening in Israel-Palestine. It's not to say that apartheid in South Africa is another thing for the Arab-Israeli conflict. They are distinct, but there are also common aspects, threads. Ed.
Mimi, thank you for bringing up that sort of a dimension of the theater. In terms of intersectionality and in terms of where things are, because it tends to become a us versus other, whether it's in the Israeli context or in terms of the more a domestic context. How do you see that playing in terms of getting people to actually come to the theater when they may feel that they're on the left and you're making a statement on the right, or they're on the right and you're making a statement on the left, or that this doesn't appeal to their particularity when you're trying to create a dialogue when people are not perhaps altogether interested in dialogue?
Right, well, I'm not exactly sure how to answer the question, only to say that I don't want to run the word dialogue into the ground, because it's also an intercultural celebration, which is to say, being in the same room with people who are very different than you, and seeing that mirrored on stage with characters or a family where the dynamics are as complex and diverse, and to experience and laugh. We've done political satires on the anti-vaccination movement. We had a play called Eureka Day recently. We have plays about black upper class privilege looking down on their lower class roots. That was a big success with Fabulation. Sometimes it's not just the dialogue, it's the experience of being in diversity doesn't need to be an abstraction. You know the liveliness of diversity when you're amongst it, and you're excited and stimulated by a cacophony of voices all trying to work something out. And so that the appeal of getting to H Street and finding a comfortable seat in the Lang Theater is that you're in good company. You're in a unique space. You're in an intentionally integrated space. Those spaces are hard to find. You can talk with people from different backgrounds who are there for the same reason. Those are forms that are hard to find. People pray in segregated communities, people eat in segregated communities, people go to see their entertainment in largely segregated communities. So to be intentionally intercultural and enjoy it, and the dialogue is a piece of it, but the experience is even more. That's what gets us excited. In an exciting city like Washington, D.C., that is gentrifying at what some would say a breakneck speed. Others who come to H Street would say, it's not gentrifying fast enough. But that tells you something about the drama we're living through there. And Mosaic thinks it's a responsible actor in the gentrification drama. That we are telling the right stories, that are inclusive, that are respectful of heritage, that are pressing important buttons, asking vital questions, and introducing new people to each other from every ward of the city and the suburban areas as well. So we're really, really proud of that. And we think as much as, we don't fill every seat every night, Ed and Muriel know we have all the dramas that are associated with being a not-for-profit in a competitive landscape culturally. It isn't easy. It wasn't easy leaving Theater J and moving to Mosaic to do a brand new startup and all that overhead, to go from the frying pan to the fire of the struggle to do this art. And yet, there's been a tremendous sense of accomplishment, that we've really built something that is moving and vital, but as you can hear, it's challenging, and we leave a lot of tears and sweat on the floor for all this work.
So you resume with resilience.
Yes.
Time for 2 more questions.
Good.
If they're quick.
Okay. Nancy Raskin.
So Ari, can you tell us about next year and the kinds of plays that you're bringing forward, and where the playwrights are coming from for next year?
Well, that's a good reminder that the official announcement of the new season is on March 8th at the Mosaic second annual benefit at City Winery of DC in Ivy City. A few years ago, none of you would be going to Ivy City except to go to the Hechinger warehouse or something. But it's a beautiful, it's a transforming part of the city, and City Winery is a fabulous venue. 4 floors, it used to be the Love Club, and it's a great venue. So Nancy, I can give you 1 or 2 hints of what's coming on board, but the official announcement is on March 8th. One of the plays we're very excited about was done 2 years ago at the Contemporary American Theater Festival. It was the hit play of 2017, and that was Eleanor Burgess's The Niceties, a play about a college professor, a white college professor, history, and her African-American 20-year-old student who writes an incredible history paper that gets some facts really wrong, and they tee off on each other, and it is a barn burner about academic correctness, about an entrenched white education, and a brilliant African-American activist who challenges that structure. And they both they should be tremendous allies together. I mean, it's such a Mosaic play. We thought, oh, we can't do it. We live this every day, or but we didn't want to give it to anybody else to do either, because people will have a lot of success. So right now it's with a major actress who's seeing if we can work out the schedule. So that's one little hint. And and if I get this play right that I'm working on, it'll be part of a 3-part Voices from a Changing Middle East festival that would actually happen in Chicago for a couple of weeks first, and then come to DC. And there'll be more music in the season, so we're excited. There'll be music at the beginning, at the end of the season too. So we're excited about that.
Well,
Last question.
last question, Barbara.
Ari, I always describe you as having been fired, so to speak, from Theater J, and in my opinion, it was the best thing that could have happened, because it seems to me
You try it.
Yeah. Because you become unbound, you're unleashed, you're free to do what you want to do and what you do best. But I'm reminded of the definition of a restaurant critic as somebody who eats out in various places so that we don't have to. And your description today is the underbelly of the experience of being unbound. I never thought of the pain and the anguish as you describe it, of putting on some of these productions. So I'm very grateful that you do it so we don't have to. Thank you.
Well, I'll end by inviting you. We've passed out season brochures that were created at the beginning of the season. Half the season is done, but there are 4 more plays to go, and there are huge discounts. You can see, listen to this, you can see 4 plays for $99. You can see you can see the Till trilogy for $89. We have been having a lot of good fortune over the last 2 months selling these smaller packages. And so we've really, this has been the exciting thing, is that I think we're learning from people that an 8-play season is a big commitment, and a 4-play or a 3-play commitment on this kind of material feels really right. So it would make me very happy if you went to our website, you took the brochure and said, I'm going to go see that Till trilogy. That sounds powerful. The birth of the modern civil rights movement, done in a buoyant, not depressing way. As I said, we've gotten extraordinary support from so many places: the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Royal Compliment Foundation are all helping to make this the most extraordinary production that we're capable of. So we'd love to see you there. I really want to thank everyone who was so accepting of this very emotional presentation. Thank you very much.
Please hold your seats for just a minute and don't clear. We have a couple of brief but urgent announcements. Well, let me tell you about next month. If you didn't pick up one of the leaflets, the topic will be the power of food to build communities or rebuild them. Our speaker is Joanna Mendelsohn Foreman. That will be on the 11th of March, the second Wednesday. And now a word from Francie.
Thank you so much, Ari. We really appreciated hearing what you have to say. And once again, welcome, Amy. Thank you. As many of you know, if you've been here before,